When we speak about water, we speak about many more things that are interconnected with and through water. So in essence, when we are dealing with water diplomacy, so to say, we are talking about production of food, production of goods. We are talking about people's life on earth. So if you cannot bring the agreement all the way down to the people that are living in the basin on the ground, and that agreement does not produce effective results there where it has to be implemented, then the agreement is not effective. So we need to be preventive. So diplomacy has to anticipate what might happen in the future. We do really need to think about ways in which we promote this idea of nature conservation diplomacy. We do need new diplomats for nature conservation in the years to come.
Ecologia podcast, new episode. Hello, welcome everybody. I'm Arafat Ben Marzo, and we are happy to host this time Dr. Alejandro Iza to talk about water diplomacy. Dr. Alejandro, he's director of IUCN Environmental Law Center and co-director of Bridge program. So during the next hour, we will try to understand why it's so important to consider water as the main challenge in this time, and why we have and we need to go through diplomacy to challenge this. So now, let's welcome Dr. Alejandro and let's get started. So Alejandro, it's good to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for inviting me.
So you're here in Tunis 3 times successfully?
Yes.
I mean, to manage to coordinate dialogue, a national dialogue.
Correct.
On water diplomacy.
Yes.
So, during this moment, water is one of the major challenge in the world.
I would say so, yes.
I mean, security, geopolitical, even economy. So let's start, from the very beginning, why we need water diplomacy.
I will say it's because water is not only water.
Okay.
So when we speak about water diplomacy, when we speak about water issues in general, water governance, water management, we speak about water and something else.
Okay.
Right. So it's water and it's land, it's water and people, it's water and food, it's water and health, it's water and animals, it's water and climate.
Behavior, mind,
exactly,
social, economy.
Exactly. So imagine how important it is to put water into that dimension. As you said, the political dimension, the economic dimension, the social dimension, the human rights dimension of water. So when we speak about water, we speak about many more things that are interconnected with and through water.
Make it possible through water, in the daily life?
Very much so. So, when we say that water is essential for life, and we repeat that all the time, this is true. So you need water to produce everything. You need water to live, but you need water for food. You need water to produce a table. You need water for everything. So in essence, when we are dealing with water diplomacy, so to say, because this is the issue that we are talking about production of food, production of goods. We are talking about people's life on earth. So that important is the issue of water diplomacy. So it's not only discussing about how much water do I get from a river that crosses the boundary between 2 or more states. It is about life of these 2, 3, 4 countries that share that water resource. And also bearing in mind that most of the water bodies, I'm not going to speak about rivers and lakes because we also have to consider the water that is
aquifer.
Oh, correct. So it's shared, crosses political boundaries. So that requires inevitably countries to sit together and to talk and find solution for managing that water together. And essentially what is at issue is life. It's life on earth. This is water diplomacy.
Okay.
That important is water diplomacy.
So is there any technical difference between, international collaboration, treatment, and right and coherent water diplomacy? Is there any principle related to water diplomacy, any framework, clear framework?
Traditionally, if you ask me, how water diplomacy and diplomacy has been seen over natural resources, is the relationship and the discussions between diplomats. So, foreign affairs to foreign affairs, diplomat versus diplomat, UN or regional bodies, and that's it. Outside that, there is no water diplomacy. Nowadays, the way we interpret and we see and we visualize and we envision the new water diplomacy is with many more actors, with many more stakeholders, not ignoring the diplomats, but including many more. Also, people on the ground, communities on the ground that live in a river basin or in a lake basin that exist in front of the river that is probably at issue in an international boundary. They do diplomacy every day. When they talk to their neighbors, when they share knowledge, water, food, anything has to do that with diplomacy. They are part of the puzzle of building, the solution over probably the river or the lake they share. So, long story short, water diplomacy nowadays is not only the diplomacy between the diplomats. It's the diplomacy between many more actors that go all the way down from the diplomats in the UN and the political capitals to the people living in the basin and are sharing probably knowledge, water, food, or trading across the border, living directly in the basin. They are also part of it.
How to ensure some coherence through the different stakeholders? From the front directly, people who live with the water, to the strategic and political.
Well, as you can imagine, they speak different languages. Not saying, national languages, but the way they communicate and they interpret the issues relating to water is probably different.
And the interest
also
can be even inside the same country, but in the different scale of layers.
Correct. Thinking about the issue, for example, when we talk about transnational issues, transboundary issues, across political boundaries, which is practically part and parcel of diplomacy and water diplomacy, these people do not realize that. Because sometimes communities living across or close to the boundaries, the political boundaries, they don't perceive that as boundaries. Because sometimes they have relatives on the other side of the border, and for them the border is not a boundary. Water flows, water is shared, and for them there is no such boundary. The transboundary aspect becomes much more prominent when you move away from the border, from the boundary, and you come closer to the capitals of the countries, where you start seeing the boundaries
maps
as political divisions, as places and spaces where you implement different laws, where you have different institutions to decide, where you have different decision makers to implement and to design the political and the legal and the institutional arrangements to govern those spaces. And that is really the challenge in terms of water diplomacy. How to reconcile the political decision making, at the national level, sometimes the subnational level, but the more you go closer to the ground, the easier it is to find common solutions across the boundaries, transnationally.
Yeah. I think even it's far from the physical boundary, but living near a river, in front of a river, it makes you directly linked to the other country.
Absolutely. It doesn't matter whether the other shore is your country or another
It's like
country.
Mediterranean, but you touch the sea, you touch the other side.
Completely.
Yeah.
If it is the north or the south, it's the same place. It's a region, it's the territory, it's the space. So you don't see the political boundaries that divide. On the contrary, they don't realize them. Okay, they speak sometimes even the same language. It's the same people. And that is something that we nowadays, when we speak about diplomacy, and especially in the area of water diplomacy, should be able to capitalize the proximity of the people with that resource, because they know the resource better than you and I that live outside or far away from the resource, even if we consume that resource in the capitals or where we live. Right? But these people are directly embedded, involved in the realities on the ground, and therefore they have to be part of the solution from day one. The challenge then, and now coming back to your initial question, is how do we ensure that all of them are part of the solution? And that certainly requires some political visioning, some political will, especially on the decision makers in the capitals, to realize that these people are also, so to say, broadly speaking, water diplomats. I always say that, and perhaps that helps to understand and to promote this idea of the local solutions and the local involvement of stakeholders, that agreements technically or treaties technically are negotiated by diplomats, right? So negotiated in capitals.
But carrying then by technical people.
Correct. And even more, and I will add something else there. To be effective, to produce effective results, they need people on the ground to implement them.
Sure.
So if you cannot bring the agreement all the way down to the people that are living in the basin on the ground, and that agreement does not produce effective results there where it has to be implemented, then the agreement is not effective. So it might be negotiated at the capital level, but the effectiveness depends on the people that live directly close to the water.
And the application of the law also.
Yeah.
It's interesting to see the different layers and the relation between the first people in front. But in reality, I see it quite hard because it's, as I told you, the different interests and the different situation make the people are sometimes greedy in some ways. So their interests are different. And when we go to the upper level and we see in the political level, countries are sometimes very subjective. I mean, it's like two people dealing with themselves, each other. So it makes the point very complicated. So from where we start, we have to consider the first layer, but I mean in the global and in the international level. So, I mean, it's very complicated.
Yeah, it is very complicated, but it can be very simple, depending on which way you see that. If you see the bottle half full or half empty. And I will try to be as optimistic as possible, because if not, we lose the battle. And those like you and I that are in this, we are optimistic. We are doing something that is contributing to something that is bigger than us. So if we are not optimistic, we lose it
and
completely.
psychological resistant
Exactly.
also.
And I think sometimes this problem comes from seeing the barriers that are created by precisely the political boundaries and all the implications that those political boundaries have as far as the territories of the different states.
And
right?
most of them are new.
Correct. Because before that, probably, they did not exist. Right? So it was one land, country, was land, domain, kingdom, call it as you wish, depending on where we are or what we are talking about. But the political division brings together political system, legal systems, institutions, and there you have the element of transnationality that creates the challenge that we are facing when we have a river that is intersected by those boundaries. One of the solutions that we bring, I say we bring, or at least this is the bet that we make in this program that we have been running for quite a number of years, thanks to the support of the Swiss government.
Bridge program.
Exactly, Bridge. Is using a common denominator that is supposed to bring together countries and societies.
Value.
Among others, but also legal system, international law. International between states. Basic principles that are commonly accepted by all the states should serve as a platform, as a common ground, as the so-called lingua franca, to understand what we should do, what we can do, and what we cannot do. And use that as a basis to build in every single river, lake, aquifer system around the world that is shared by states, the architecture that is supposed to govern that space, but using those principles as the basis for the house. So when you have two states that cannot come to an agreement for whatever reason, sometimes it's even, perceptions. Sometimes is even more than perceptions. Sometimes it's even the intervention of different factors that is suffered by one state and not by the other state. But in order to bring them together, you need to find some common ground. And I think that commonly accepted rules and principles like those that come from the international development of the law is a good basis to start the discussion about. Principles like cooperation, the obligation not to cause transboundary damage or beyond the boundaries of your state, or the principle of equity in the use of resources that are shared, are well understood, even by local people, those that live in the proximity of the rivers and the lakes, in a different way.
It's fairness.
No, exactly. And this is what gives you the common ground, the common understanding to start building, as I said, the institutional or the house, the architecture of whatever basin, river, lake, or aquifer system that is required to be put in place.
Okay. Is there any international water court?
No, there is not. A court as such for water only? No. So you have the International Court of Justice in The Hague, that decides about conflicts that are brought to the court by the states that are members of the United Nations. And certainly there are a number of cases that related to water conflicts that were brought to the International Court of Justice. There are arbitrations that have been decided, around the world over water, but per se, a water court as such, no. There is not. There used to be, now that you're saying that, it's an interesting point. There used to be many, I don't know exactly, now you're challenging my memory, but in the past in Spain, there used to be a tribunal on water. I will have to think about that, but there used to be a water tribunal in Spain many years ago that decided over water issues alone. And this is an interesting concept, because the importance of water speaks in favor of putting in place whatever system, as far as I can see, to avoid or to resolve conflicts, because this is what we don't want to. So we want to have solutions because of the importance of water. And having a court, a tribunal, or people that work on that for avoiding the conflicts, for me is already a solution. Right? For me, it's already avoiding the problem, finding the solution. Great, super idea. Because in essence, in the world that we are living now, with the challenges that we are experiencing through overconsumption, and I was presenting the other day, for example, in our dialogue here in Tunisia, the problem of plastics, huge problem. Directly connected with water. Most of the plastics, imagine, that go to the sea, how do you think they go to the sea? Through rivers.
And I go further, I see natural conservation diplomacy. And we can find inside all these sides.
There you are. So put water, if not in the center, depending on which way you would like to see that.
It's holistic, so it's all connected.
Absolutely. We do really need to think about ways in which we promote this idea of nature conservation diplomacy. We do need new diplomats for nature conservation in the years to come. Absolutely,
okay.
I'm with you.
I think this point very interesting.
This is a very good point. This is certainly a good point. Very super interesting point of view. But in the understanding that when we speak about that level of diplomacy, we not only involve diplomats. We also consider others, but the diplomats. Not ignoring the diplomats, not ignoring the level of diplomacy that is.
In other ways, says there is not only a state solution.
Correct. Exactly. That's what I would promote. That's my understanding. Some people might disagree.
It's not aggressive for state.
I don't think so. On the contrary, it complements that. It doesn't leave the political decision makers alone with a solution. On the contrary, if from the beginning the people are on board, then half of the problem is already resolved. It's not that the decision has been adopted and then we need to work on the implementation. It's that we start working on the implementation bottom up right from the beginning.
Yeah.
Imagine that. That will be a great advance, a great step forward in finding real solutions to all the problems that we are experiencing nowadays around the world with all of that, with all the natural resources, including water. But what I was saying is, for example, climate change also. When we do climate change diplomacy, again, bringing back the discussion or this conversation into water diplomacy. When we do climate diplomacy, we do water diplomacy and vice versa. A huge part of the solution of climate change is water. Think about arid areas that are arid per se, not necessarily because of bad water management. They are arid already. But bad water management, bad water governance exacerbates the problem.
Yeah.
Therefore, if we have climate change in a dry area and we don't do proper water management and governance and certainly diplomacy, then we have the problem, a larger set of problems.
It's like intersectionality.
Yes.
I don't know if you know the term. So it's like a part who getting different injustice, and the fact that he has different role that amplify the final injustice.
Yes.
It's another way, but we can see it from this perspective.
Yes, I agree with you. It's the interconnection and the succession of different problems that are exacerbated if you do not tackle one of that, at least one of the layers of the problem. And water has that peculiarity, so to say, because the interconnectedness of water with all these different resources means that you need to tackle water one way or the other in order to resolve other set of issues that are interrelated to water. So again, water diplomacy is not only diplomacy of water. It's not only about water. So when we speak about water,
peace dealing,
probably among others. We, very recently, and this is probably something that we did not manage to exhaust in these dialogues here in Tunis, but hopefully these dialogues will continue. I mean, there is a huge interest in continuing that, is that we just started to speak about that. And yesterday there was a huge debate during the afternoon session about considering rivers and water bodies as legal entities, as living entities. So living entities that have their own right, irrespective of the people. And this is a very challenging issue, a very interesting concept.
Also in the legal way.
Imagine that, giving rights to an entity that is not a person. Because normally you grant rights to a person. And a river is not a person.
Inca way of living.
For example, this has to do with those indigenous concepts that look at the earth like Mother Earth, like the Pachamama, like the good living, that we know in Latin America. And but this is a concept that is getting a lot of traction around the world. I'm not saying that it is easy to be implemented, because it has to be reconciled with a number of issues, but it's an interesting idea of creating a different layer of protection, of understanding of the importance of the resource that we are dealing with. So if you consider the river as a living entity, you will perceive how much you have to do to preserve that, not only because of the dependencies that you have of that entity, but also because of the entity in itself.
His rise to be.
Correcto. Like a person. So yesterday, I tell you, we started the debate, but unfortunately we ran out of time. So hopefully next time we have a dialogue here in Tunis on that. You can join us, and then be part of that, because I never expected that to be quite such a subject, to get so much traction here. But we just started the conversation on that. And the thing is, imagine putting that in place in a transnational context. So where we are talking about a river that crosses the boundaries of two states. I don't know yet how it can work, but I think it's an interesting concept to explore.
Okay.
Whatever brings solution for me, is something worth at least analyzing and thinking about it.
Yeah, start reflection on it.
Why not?
Give me some example about situation in the world that, they are facing a critical situation. We can say something about Egypt and
Well, this is you are starting with the hot area, so to say, the Nile. This is a hot place. Certainly, I mean, this is if you think about a challenging place, is certainly the Nile Basin, but it's because of the number of states, because of the number of realities. This is half of a continent. I mean, the Nile is not only Egypt and Sudan. The Nile goes all the way until the equatorial lakes of Africa.
Kenya,
Rwanda, Uganda, it has lakes inside the Nile. So it's different basins within one single basin. And so actually one of our colleagues, Hekma, that has been, part and parcel of these dialogues, she is one expert on the Nile. So you need to talk to Hekma about that, because she wrote her thesis on that.
For a second time.
For a second time. That's what I'm thinking. But, we have had a lot of discussions on that. So the Nile, how do you approach the Nile? How do you reconcile historical uses of water like those that are being claimed by Egypt with the development needs of states in the equatorial part of Africa that certainly have a right to use water, and as I said, with the historical needs of a country like Egypt. That's a huge.
But the today need is completely different.
I know.
The way of living of today.
I know.
I mean, coming back to the history to see the.
I know. And therefore, you can not only consider the past and the historical uses of water, but also the current ones. So you need to consider the population that depends on the water. You need to consider the current and the future uses of the water. And these are all ingredients of the difficulties or the challenges, better said, that we face when we talk about water diplomacy, in whatever context we're talking about. But the Nile is one of the issues. The Middle East, if you move further to the east, Jordan, Palestine, Israel, Lebanon, Mesopotamia, you have there still a lot of challenges, countries to having to agree on, some kind of agreement to regulate the rivers that they share. The Tigris and the Euphrates are also shared rivers. At least 3 are there: Turkey, Syria, and Iraq. Imagine what have happened, in the recent past, where Iraq was, quite unstable. Now Iraq is getting better organized, realizing that they have to come to an agreement with the other states in the basin. Huge challenges there as well. But not only there, in those, so to say, emblematic basins, you will find, challenges, even in smaller ones, that apparently are not that challenging, but they can become very challenging. I'm just thinking, for example, places where within the Nile, for instance, now that you started about the Nile, there are several layers there, and very recently I've been working and supporting, the work of Kenya and Uganda on a sub-basin of the Nile, related to Lake Victoria. They have come a long way, these two countries, to decide over the waters that they share. But how? Thinking about their development, thinking about the projects that they would like to develop together over the waters for the benefit of the people living around the basins that they share, right? So bringing together stakeholders of these two states and visioning, what sort of projects do we need together for our joint development, right? So that creates the idea that you are dealing with a resource that no matter where the boundary goes and flows, belongs to the two of you, right? So perhaps it's a bit idealistic what I'm proposing, but the moment in which you bring people together to define the solutions, then the transnationality, the intersectoriality, the political boundaries become less apparent, more diffuse, and it's much easier to get the solution, simply.
And the people get touch between themselves
Sure.
at a very basic level.
Absolutely.
They know each other and became friends, and yeah.
Absolutely. 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 So this is an interesting place where I've been watching very, very closely and very recently. Interesting to follow. They are still working on that. Different layers of interactions, different type of agreements, general basin agreements, specific projects agreements. But the basic there is come together to identify the possible solutions, and then put in place the necessary arrangements for implementing those solutions. I like that idea. I really like that idea.
Yeah.
I really like that idea.
But when it comes to transboundary water, when everything is okay, they do have much water.
Yeah.
So the relation between countries is okay.
Yeah.
So Canada, United States, for example, previously, not now.
Yeah.
So it's much easier.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, is there any need in their level to work diplomatically on these common resources?
So if I understand you correctly, or the other side of your question is, you need more diplomacy when you have less water.
Okay, let's go from this side.
Because I will say you might need, in both cases, in both scenarios, more or less. That's the issue of quantity. But what about the issue of quality? You might have plenty of water, but the problem, the relationship between the two states might not necessarily be the issue of quantity, but of quality of the water. Imagine that the water that comes to your territory, and this is an issue in the developing world many times, is not of sufficient quality. Mm-hmm. Is polluted, not well treated, because the country upstream does not have the capacity or enough means to treat the water, So the water that comes downstreams is, so it's not of sufficient and good quality. So there is an impact already there. And that was, by the way, the case in Europe many years ago. So don't think that now those sophisticated systems of managing rivers like the Rhine and the Danube, as we know them now, we're dealing with perfect river systems, clean and so on and so forth. No. The basic problem, outside navigation in those cases was water quality. So there was enough water, but the water that was flowing through the river, crossing the boundaries of the states, were not of sufficient quality. And therefore the countries have to come together to decide what to do to ensure and to enhance the quality of the water. So for me, getting back to your original question, diplomacy is needed wherever water crosses boundaries of states, sovereign states, always, no matter whether there is enough water or sufficient water, whether there is good quality of water or not good quality of water, and also, and even more so, anticipating what might happen in the future. You might have water now, but you don't know what might happen in the future with climate change and all the global changes that are happening around the world. Yeah. Right? So we need to be preventive. So diplomacy has to anticipate what might happen in the future. And this is what we are trying to do with Bridge, to create the sense, I will say, not of urgency only, but that dealing with water is not only dealing with water, it's dealing with a much larger number of issues that are related or connected to water, that have to do with sustainability in general, and that you need to anticipate the solutions in order to prevent the possible damages that might happen, and not to wait the damage to be in front of you and then have to resolve that, on site. Anticipate the potential problems that might happen.
Is there any legal or approach that combine this water dealing and diplomacy with peace?
I will say so. And this is one of the things that I was trying to... It's interesting that you mentioned that, because you were unless someone shared with you the last session that we had here in Tunis, where we discuss how the future regime on policy and law on water around the world would look like. And this is something not final yet. But what we discussed yesterday precisely was that the future regime for governing water, at the end of the day for diplomacy, has to consider all these different aspects. Water for human consumption, water for environmental needs. I'm not putting them in order. I'm just mentioning that. Water for peace, water for human rights, water for humanitarian issues.
Okay.
Imagine how the Horn of Africa, and it's not that far from here, how many people are moving out of the places where they belong, where they live, because of humanitarian issues that are being exacerbated by climate and by human conflicts. Those issues have to do with water, with the availability of water, and exacerbate, where people move, the problems of water wherever they go. So, in other words, and to come back to your question, somehow when we design the future water policies, the future water treaties, and the institutional arrangements of the future to govern waters, we have to consider all those issues. And the issue of security is central to that.
Okay. Interesting way of seeing things. Yeah. I want to just make a look from very day-to-day perspective.
Yeah.
We are, I think, 6 February or 5 February 2025. And the situation of the international relationships and worldwide security are not so optimistic. And the first thing it comes to my mind is the multilateralism and its philosophy are touched. So can we imagine that the old way of doing diplomacy or any other way to do things are still operative, or we need to innovative approach or see something else from different perspective?
Nice, interesting question. In the water sector, we have seen quite recently, an interesting development, which is the fact that we have nowadays 2 global treaties dealing with water, with transnational, transboundary, or shared waters. So one is a regime that goes back to 1992, and one is a regime from 1997. So the details, I don't think are that relevant, but important is to know that there are 2 global treaties, 2 global arrangements that are in place for countries to follow, for countries to adhere to, for giving orientation in terms of diplomacy towards the future. So, and that's very, very unique and very, very important. We have, as I said, and as you said also, some other legal regimes, global and multilateral regimes, dealing with nature. For example, the Convention on Biological Diversity, or climate change, the Climate Change Convention, or the Convention to Combat Desertification. I see in those conventions also the need to streamline the debate around water. So I see there also an opportunity to amplify the debate on water at a multilateral level, which is something that we cannot lose, right? So while having two treaties dealing with water, we need to streamline and mainstream, better said, water into these other fora.
But we need synergy.
I know.
This is the key point.
We need synergy, but for the synergy, I think that we need to have leaders that can bring the discussion and that can mainstream the debate.
Worldwide governance?
For example, among others. And I know what is going to happen from the question that is going to come from your side is the world ready to have all that when multilateralism is in a little crisis? Can be. I know. I'm optimistic, and I think you're also optimistic. But let me finish with that idea. So, mainstream water into those issues. Find the connection with biodiversity, which is there, with climate, which is there, with desertification, which is there, but also go down into the regional level and enhance the discussions and the debates and the solutions finding in the regional level. Because water is much closer there, I'm not saying that it's not important, the global level, but the regional level, you already have some structures in which water is part of that, is being debated already. And at the national level, at the local level as well. The problem is always that when you go to the local level, it becomes less tangible, the transnational aspect. Mm-hmm. It becomes very local. And this is where I think we also need to work in the sense that the more we go to the local, we make sure, remember how we started this conversation, that also at the local level, you have the transboundary component. Even if they don't see it, this is exactly where you have the transnational issue.
Yeah, it's like a very scalable point of view.
Correct. Yeah. Correct. Mm-hmm. So we need to go up from top to bottom and go all the way up again. So to cut the long story short, I do believe that in spite of whatever crisis that might happen to multilateralism, we have already well-established governance processes in the area of water and in areas relating to water, where we need to still need to do some homework to streamline water that certainly give us some light at the end of the tunnel and certainly will inform and stimulate further water diplomacy in the future.
Good. Thank you.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah, we pick you up in the end of the day.
It's a pleasure. Always a pleasure to be here. Always a pleasure, and thank you for such a stimulating discussion.
You're welcome. Thank you, Alejandro.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.